Russia is fighting the war in Ukraine with its fingers, not with its fists. What we're seeing on the ground is concocted, and it's fiction that is intended to deceive us. If Russia wanted to defeat the NATO alliance, it could do a nuclear EMP attack on NATO, and the resulting EMP field would black out electric grids from Ireland all the way to the edge of Ukraine. NATO would in effect be paralyzed by that one blow. Would the United States put itself at risk to save NATO Europe? Do the Russians really believe that we would do that? The Russians know that you can certainly win a nuclear war, and I think they're calling our bluff right now. The Russians are different. You know, they have never forgotten the many surprise attacks that they've suffered, including Operation Barbarossa, which was when Nazi Germany almost conquered the Soviet Union and almost destroyed it in a massive surprise attack. And their general staff says, we're never going to be surprised again. If there's ever another war, we're going to be the ones making the surprise attack. And they have postured their strategic forces to do that exactly. Most of their warheads are on intercontinental ballistic missiles that are ready to launch in a few minutes. Even their ballistic missile submarines carry intercontinental ballistic missiles, so they don't have to put to sea in order to attack us. They can launch right from port side and strike us, just like the land-based ICBM force. Even their ballistic missile submarines at sea, unlike us, you know, they usually don't send their submarines into the deep oceanic areas of the Pacific and the Atlantic. They're afraid that we would use our attack submarines to surprise them and attack their ballistic missile submarines. So they protect their submarines from surprise attack by keeping them in bastion areas, this White Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk, which are heavily defended by their Navy. Now, underwater, they have cables across the bottom of these seas so that their submarines can clandestinely hook in to the General Staff Command and Control Network. So we can't even listen in if they're sending communications, unlocking codes, emergency action messages. They can get all of that secretly by these cables, just like all the other missile forces of Russia. They can raise the mobilization of their forces secretly. We won't see it. And then they could launch their surprise attack. Almost all of our information about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine is coming from the Ukrainian government, which wants us to jump in and get involved in the war and help Ukrainians win. And it's also coming from the Biden administration, because the Biden administration President Biden doesn't want the conversation to be about his throwing away of 50 years of American credibility. You know, our security guarantees to our allies are all based on our credibility, and that credibility is a precious thing. But he put it all on the line in Ukraine by drawing a line in the sand and saying, Russia, don't cross that line. And Putin went across that line with tanks. Biden and his people in the White House don't want the conversation to be about that. So they have an interest, too, in convincing us, well, he crossed the line, but the Russians aren't winning. They're doing very badly in Ukraine. They're bogged down. They're losing the war. But this encourages people to want to involve us in the war, and to jump into the war. And I think that would be a grave mistake, because I don't think we can trust what we're being told about the status of the war. We are probably making a very serious error in assuming that the Russians are losing. I'm going to propose to you, and I'm not saying this is the ground truth in Ukraine, but I'm going to propose to you an alternative reality, something you're not going to hear from anybody else, I'm pretty sure, that is not, there's a different way of interpreting the facts on the ground in Ukraine. And it's the Austerlitz scenario. You know, we're all convinced, and guys like Senator Graham want us to jump in and get involved in the war because the Ukrainians are telling us that they're killing Russians at the rate of 10-1, and the Russians, are on the verge of defeat. And if we only come in and help them, that we can quickly defeat the Russians. That's what everybody thinks with 100% certainty is the truth on the ground. And I say the fog of war is so thick and the circumstances such that we can't trust that. Maybe it's true, but I don't know it's true. This could be an alternative. You know, maybe this is all being done deliberately by the Russians, and they want us to think that they're bogged down, and they want us to think that they're losing the battle, because they want us to jump into the Ukrainian war and crush us with that 10-1 advantage in tactical nuclear weapons, the advantage in biological and chemical weapons, their advantage in cyber weapons, and just crush us and permanently solve the problem of NATO and the United States. You know, it might be more about taking over Ukraine. It might be more than taking over Ukraine in terms of the Russian objective. Maybe what they want to do is just change the world order by becoming the top dog in that world order. And how is the Battle of Austerlitz relevant to this? Well, the Russian general staff are great students of military history. Austerlitz was Napoleon's greatest victory in 1805. And they make particular study of that one because the victory was over Russia itself. The combined armies, the greatest powers of Europe, of the mainland Europe, were involved in that battle. Russia, Austria, and Prussia were all allied together on one side against Napoleon, against the French army. And Napoleon, where it was fought, it was closer to Russia. So Napoleon wanted to create the impression that he was going to lose this battle. He sent intelligence to the Russians and Austrians that he was overextended, that he had supply problems, that he didn't have enough men. He deliberately occupied the worst part of the battlefield. He had troops defect to the Russians and Austrians to tell them, we're beaten. We're not going to lose this war. He actually had whole regiments of French troops retreat from the Russians. All of this was to lure them into attacking and have battle there on what had been Napoleon's chosen ground, so that he could then unleash a number of corps that he could see concealed from view, and he crushed the combined forces of Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and it gave Napoleon dominance over Europe for the next decade. So these crowned heads of Europe, while he didn't take over their countries, they were basically bootlickers to Napoleon and had to do whatever he said until Napoleon made the fatal decision to invade Russia and stayed too long. But it could be, I submit, and I'm not saying that this is the scenario that's happening. It could be that Russians are bogged down and they're losing. But I think we have to be more imaginative and think about, well, what are other scenarios that may be possible? Is it possible that they actually want us to intervene? It's hard to resist the conclusion that a lot of the things the Russians are doing are deliberately intended to provoke us. There's another scenario about Ukraine that we ought to keep in mind. Everybody has assumed going into this, and I have to admit, even myself, that if the Russians invaded Ukraine, they would want a quick victory. Because here I forgot about my own lesson about mirror imaging, that we ought not to assume that our enemies think the way we do and would wage war the way the West would. We always want a quick victory. We want the killing and the battles to be over as soon as possible, and to capture the territory as soon as possible. And we had a reason to think that Russia might do that in Ukraine because of the way they took over Crimea. They did it in lightning speed, very little bloodshed, and it was a great victory for them. But there was another scenario going on right under our noses that we appear to have ignored. And that's what's happened to Luhansk and the battle, the long siege war that's been going on in eastern Ukraine. That's been going on for 8 years. The Russians at any time could have ended that war. They could have decisively taken over that area, but they haven't. They deliberately wanted to have a protracted war in that area. Maybe what Putin wants is to permanently have a long war going on in Ukraine as long as he can do it. Something we need to remember is that chaos is in the national interests of Russia. It dries up oil prices. Their second most important industry is armaments. When the world thinks it's always on the verge of World War III, people are much more interested in buying arms. And so that's going to help the Russian arms industry. Here's another scenario. And several of these scenarios, by the way, can be simultaneously true. Another scenario is the Spanish Civil War. Before Nazi Germany launched World War II, they wanted to make sure that their new weapons and tactics, the Blitzkrieg that enabled them to almost win World War II, they wanted to make sure it would work. And they wanted to have veteran soldiers who had combat experience. And so they used the Spanish Civil War to give combat experience to many of their soldiers and to test out their new weapons and tactics. I think it's no accident that Russia is using some of its advanced weapons, like the hypersonic Iskander has been launched. I'm pretty sure that they didn't do that just to destroy a building. I think the reason they're doing that is to test out their new weapon systems, to give experience to their troops in launching these systems, to give experience to their ground troops and to their general staffs in, well, here's how you actually fight a real war. A veteran soldier who's got combat experience, who's been blooded, is worth 2 or 3 soldiers who are green and who have never been exposed to combat. And I think that that's one of the things Putin wants out of this war, whether he's losing or not. He's going to value very highly the experience that his general staff and that his ground troops have gotten out of Ukraine. So these are all alternative theories to the one that is the only one that we're hearing on television every day. The one that has the happy face on it for us is that, oh, the Russians are on the verge of defeat and we can jump in there and help the Ukrainians achieve a quick victory. Please be aware. There are at least several alternative theories that suggest that if we do that, we're going to be handed another Afghanistan, another Iraq, another Syria, another Libya, another military disaster, except this one won't be a small one. This one would be, it could destroy NATO and it could destroy the United States and it could change the balance of power in the world if we're wrong about this assessment that we're hearing every day on television. Right now, American policy in Ukraine is to fight to the death of the last brave Ukrainian and apply economic sanctions against Russia as if that's really doing something. How many times have we applied economic sanctions and they've done nothing? We've done it against Iran, against North Korea, against China. Economic sanctions don't seem to accomplish anything. When economic sanctions really work, they can actually provoke a war. That's why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, because FDR wanted them to stop attacking China. And so he imposed an oil sanction on Japan. And they had to make a choice. Do we surrender to the economic sanctions from the degenerate Americans who are not willing to fight us? Or do we launch Pearl Harbor and take over, establish our Southeast Asia co-prosperity sphere, invading the Philippines, invading Southeast Asia, and achieve our dream of a Japanese Pacific Empire? They chose, most military dictatorships only respect military strength. And that's what the Japanese did. So, what we're doing here in Ukraine isn't building up our credibility that we're willing to take existential risks in order to save our friends. As a footnote to the Ukraine war, by the way, one of the main reasons Russia has invaded Ukraine is because it believed that Ukraine was going to become a member of NATO. And that even if we didn't officially make Ukraine a member of NATO, that it had in effect was becoming a de facto member of NATO. Aren't we behaving exactly as if that's true? And isn't our behavior and this warmongering that's going on playing right in to the paranoid views of the Russian general staff and a lot of the Russian people that, look, Putin was right. We were planning to make Ukraine a member of NATO, and we're behaving just as if they're really a member of NATO. As I said at the beginning, our strategic posture and the Russian strategic posture is as different as night and day. Our strategic forces are designed for transparency and for deterrence and what's called crisis stability, so that the other side doesn't start getting suspicious that we're going to make a surprise attack against them in the middle of a crisis like the Ukraine war. The Russian strategic posture is designed for fighting a war, for winning a war, and to do so by achieving a surprise attack. That's why they have put most of their eggs, almost all their nuclear weapons, on intercontinental ballistic missiles, both in silos, mobile ICBMs, and their sea-based deterrent, things that can be launched in a few minutes with very little warning.